the night the throne went silent. Before we begin, if you think you've seen power, betrayal, and blood-soaked ambition before, think again. Subscribe now because this story doesn't just unfold, it detonates. Like this video if you're ready to step into the shadows, and tell me in the comments right now, when a king falls, who really takes the crown? Stay with me until the end, because what investigators uncovered in the aftermath changed the balance of power across an entire continent. It was 2:17 a.m. when the first convoy tore down the highway outside Guadalajara. Black SUVs, tinted windows, engines screaming through humid night air. Then came the gunfire. Residents would later say it sounded like fireworks, sharp, echoing cracks bouncing between concrete buildings. Others said it felt different. Controlled. Precise. Professional. By the time the smoke cleared, the most powerful man in one of the world's most feared criminal empires lay slumped inside an armored vehicle. The leader of the Jalisco Cartel was dead. Within minutes, encrypted radios across western Mexico lit up. Safe houses activated lockdown protocols. Armed men vanished into alleyways. Surveillance systems were wiped remotely. It was as if an invisible switch had been flipped, chaos disguised as discipline. But something was wrong. Cartels are built on hierarchy. Loyalty. Fear. Remove the head, and the body doesn't simply collapse, it thrashes. And that thrashing had already begun. By dawn, military patrols had flooded the outskirts of the city. Helicopters circled low, cutting through gray morning haze. News stations scrambled for confirmation, but official statements were vague, almost cautious. An armed confrontation. Unconfirmed casualties. Ongoing investigation. Behind closed doors, federal intelligence units weren't asking who pulled the trigger. They were asking who ordered it. Because leaders like this don't fall by accident. He had survived assassination attempts before. He had outmaneuvered rivals, evaded capture, and built an empire stretching from rural drug labs to international distribution routes reaching the United States and Europe. His network moved product across borders with terrifying efficiency. And now he was gone. Detective Alejandro Ruiz stood inside the bullet-riddled SUV as forensic teams worked around him. Ruiz wasn't new to cartel violence. 20 years in organized crime had carved permanent lines into his face. But this felt different. Too clean. Too coordinated. The windshield was shattered inward. Ballistics suggested shooters from multiple angles. Yet there were no abandoned vehicles nearby. No captured suspects. No celebratory online chatter from rival factions. Silence. And in cartel politics, silence is never random. Ruiz's phone buzzed. A secure message from Federal Command. Watch the inner circle. The inner circle consisted of 5 men, lieutenants who had risen with the leader over the last decade. Each controlled a separate wing of the operation: logistics, finance, enforcement, international transport, political bribery. Any one of them stood to gain everything. Or lose everything. By mid-morning, rumors spread through Guadalajara's underground economy. Street-level dealers paused operations. Local businesses quietly closed early. Mothers kept children indoors. Everyone knew what happened when a power vacuum opened inside a cartel. Territory disputes. Retaliation. Public displays meant to send messages. Across the border in Texas, DEA analysts monitored encrypted traffic. They'd spent years mapping the cartel's expansion into U.S. markets, particularly fentanyl pipelines and meth distribution. If internal war erupted, shipments could spike violently as factions scrambled for cash. Or routes could fracture entirely. Either scenario meant instability. Back in Mexico, Ruiz requested surveillance footage from nearby toll booths. At 1:52 a.m., 30 minutes before the attack, 2 unregistered vehicles trailed the convoy at a calculated distance. Their plates were cloned. Their drivers wore caps low over their faces. Professional. Inside one recovered shell casing, forensic teams found something chilling: markings consistent with weapons previously seized from the cartel's own enforcement wing. Friendly fire? Or deliberate misdirection? Meanwhile, whispers emerged from within the organization itself. One lieutenant, known for his cold efficiency, had cancelled a private meeting with the leader hours before the attack. Another had abruptly transferred millions in cryptocurrency into offshore wallets 2 days prior. Coincidence? Or preparation? As night fell again over Guadalajara, something else happened. 3 low-level operatives connected to internal security vanished. Not arrested. Not found. Just gone. Ruiz leaned over a map in the operations room. Colored pins marked suspected territories controlled by each lieutenant. If violence erupted, these zones would ignite first. But instead of chaos, there was restraint. Almost as if someone had already taken control behind the curtain. Then came the phone call that shifted everything. A confidential informant, voice trembling, claimed the leader had been betrayed from within. According to him, the convoy route had been altered at the last minute. Only 2 people knew the updated path. One of them was already dead in the SUV. The other was missing. The cartel's head of logistics, a man known for absolute loyalty, had disappeared hours before the ambush. His home was empty. Security cameras wiped. Family relocated without warning. Ruiz felt the pieces tightening. If logistics controlled routes, and routes were leaked, then the ambush wasn't an external strike. It was surgical removal. And removal implies succession. But succession in a cartel isn't ceremonial. It's violent. Late that evening, intercepted radio chatter confirmed what authorities feared. 2 factions were mobilizing armed units toward the same industrial district on the city's outskirts. A meeting, or a trap. Federal forces debated intervention. Step in too soon, and they risked exposing their intelligence. Step in too late, and civilians could be caught in crossfire. As armored trucks rolled quietly into position, Ruiz received one final update from cyber analysts. They had decrypted a fragment of an internal message sent minutes after the leader's death. Phase 2 begins now. Not revenge. Not mourning. Phase 2. Which meant the assassination wasn't the climax. It was the opening move. And when investigators finally forced entry into an abandoned warehouse tied to the missing logistics chief, they found something that chilled even seasoned officers. Pinned to a corkboard were detailed expansion maps, new trafficking corridors into Europe, new synthetic production sites, and a handwritten note listing 3 names. All 3 were members of the inner circle. 2 circled in red. 1 crossed out. The crossed-out name belonged to the dead leader, which meant the future of the powerful Jalisco Cartel wasn't uncertain. It was already being rewritten, and someone inside had been planning it for months. But the most disturbing part? The final line scribbled at the bottom of the board. By the time they realize it, it will be too late. And as sirens wailed in the distance, Ruiz understood something terrifying. The assassination wasn't about destroying the cartel. It was about evolving it to something far more dangerous. If you think this was just a power struggle, you haven't seen what Phase 2 really means. Stay close because in the next, if you're still watching right now, you already know this isn't just another crime story. This is power reshaping itself in real time. Before we go deeper, ask yourself, was this a betrayal or a calculated evolution? Drop your theory in the comments, because the twist coming up will test every assumption you have. And if you want the full truth when it unfolds, make sure you're subscribed right now. The final revelation won't wait for anyone. The industrial district sat under a cold blue haze as armored federal vehicles held their positions in silence. Inside the warehouse, floodlights cut across steel beams and concrete floors. But the meeting everyone feared had already dissolved before authorities breached the perimeter. No gunfight. No bodies. Just absence. On a folding table in the center of the warehouse lay a burner phone, still warm. Detective Ruiz stared at it as digital forensics carefully isolated the device. One outgoing message had been sent minutes before federal units moved in. Adjust timeline. They're listening. Ruiz felt the words settle like ice in his chest. They're listening. That wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. Someone inside law enforcement had tipped them off. Across the city, 2 factions within the cartel were moving, not openly clashing, but consolidating. One faction controlled distribution routes north toward the United States. The other oversaw synthetic production and chemical sourcing. If they united under one successor, the organization would stabilize, possibly stronger than before. If they fractured, the violence could spill into public streets. In Washington, D.C., intelligence briefings turned urgent. European agencies flagged increased encrypted chatter referencing new maritime routes through the Atlantic. Analysts believed the cartel was preparing to expand beyond traditional smuggling corridors, diversifying risk, decentralizing leadership. It was corporate strategy disguised as criminal survival. Back in Guadalajara, Ruiz reviewed financial records tied to the missing logistics chief. Cryptocurrency wallets had multiplied overnight. Funds were flowing not outward, but inward, as if investors were betting on whoever was orchestrating this transition. This wasn't chaos. It was a hostile takeover. Meanwhile, one of the inner circle, a man known publicly only by his alias El Arquitecto, released a subtle message through back channels. Not a declaration of leadership. Not a threat. A reassurance. Operations continue. Stability remains. That single line did more than any show of force could. It calmed distributors. It signaled to suppliers that shipments would not be interrupted. It suggested continuity. But Ruiz noticed something else. The message didn't mention loyalty to the fallen leader. It mentioned the future. By the third night after the assassination, something shifted. 3 mid-level commanders loyal to different factions were found detained by federal forces, tipped off anonymously about their locations. Precision arrests. No leaks to the media. Someone was cleaning the board. And that someone had access to both cartel intelligence and federal movements. If you're piecing this together right now, pause for a second and think, is this an inside job from one trader or a coordinated operation between rivals? Comment below, I read every theory. Because what happens next will make you question who the real players are. Ruiz began to suspect the unthinkable. What if Phase 2 wasn't about internal succession at all? What if it was about transformation, shifting from a personality-driven empire to a decentralized, almost invisible network? Remove the recognizable leader. Remove the face. Replace it with structure. Harder to target. Harder to dismantle. One encrypted file recovered from the warehouse revealed projected revenue models, comparing the old centralized command structure to a proposed cell-based model. Smaller autonomous units. Less traceable communication. Independent logistics hubs. It looked disturbingly efficient. Then came the real shock. Satellite imagery confirmed increased activity at a remote property previously considered dormant. Trucks moving at night. Chemical shipments rerouted. Security upgraded. But ownership records tied the property not to any known cartel lieutenant, but to a shell company linked indirectly to a retired federal official. Ruiz's pulse quickened. If corruption extended that high, the assassination wasn't just criminal. It was strategic. Meanwhile, violence still hadn't erupted publicly. That silence created a dangerous illusion of calm. Local citizens returned to daily routines, unaware that power was consolidating quietly behind closed doors. Inside the cartel, loyalty tests were underway. Encrypted loyalty pledges. Financial audits of regional commanders. Anyone hesitating was sidelined, quietly removed from influence without spectacle. Efficiency replaced intimidation. And that terrified investigators more than open warfare ever could. Because chaos can be exploited, discipline is harder to penetrate. By the end of the week, intercepted communications revealed something that changed the entire narrative. The phrase, Project Azul, appeared repeatedly in secured channels. Azul. Blue. Not a person. Not a place. A project. Cross-referencing internal files, analysts discovered that Azul referred to expansion across Atlantic routes into Western Europe, leveraging maritime trade gaps and decentralized ports. This was bigger than revenge. Bigger than Mexico. This was globalization. If you've made it this far, you already understand, this isn't about one cartel leader falling. It's about what replaces him. If stories like this keep you on edge, hit like right now so this video reaches more people who need to see how power really shifts behind the headlines. And if you want Chapter 3 the moment it drops, the confrontation that could expose the architect behind all of this, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because we're not done. Late one evening, Ruiz received a classified intercept from an international partner agency. A voice message, distorted but clear enough to identify tone. Controlled. The speaker said only one sentence. The old era had a king. The new era has no throne. Ruiz replayed it 3 times. No throne means no target. No target means no easy victory. And just as he began connecting the final threads, Internal Affairs delivered devastating news. One member of Ruiz's own task force had accessed sealed case files outside authorized hours. The access logs matched the exact timestamps when cartel factions adjusted their movements. The leak wasn't theoretical anymore. It was inside the room. And when they pulled surveillance footage from headquarters security cameras, they saw something that made Ruiz's blood run cold. The compromised officer wasn't acting alone. He was meeting someone in the underground parking structure. A figure stepping out of a black SUV. A silhouette impossible to identify in the dim light. But the posture, the composure. It resembled someone Ruiz had already questioned. Someone from the inner circle. The camera glitched for exactly 7 seconds before cutting out. 7 seconds. Long enough for a handshake. Long enough for confirmation. As Ruiz stared at the frozen frame, one realization became unavoidable. The assassination had not destabilized the cartel. It had synchronized it. And the true successor wasn't claiming the throne publicly. He was building something untouchable. We will reveal whether law enforcement can stop this transformation or whether Phase 2 was only the beginning of something far more calculated. If you think you know who's behind Project Azul, comment their name now. And if this tension is hitting the way it should, you already know what to do. Subscribe, because the final chapter changes everything. The era with no throne. If you've made it to this final, you already know this isn't just about a fallen leader, it's about the birth of something colder, smarter, and far more dangerous. Before we uncover who was truly behind Project Azul, I want you to pause and ask yourself, was the assassination a betrayal or a blueprint? Drop your final theory in the comments right now. And if you crave real, high-stakes crime stories that expose the hidden layers behind the headlines, subscribe before this chapter ends, because the next story will be even darker. The underground parking structure smelled of oil and damp concrete. Detective Ruiz stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights, staring at the frozen surveillance frame. The image quality was poor, but the posture of the man stepping out of the SUV was unmistakable, controlled, deliberate, confident. Not a soldier. Not a messenger. A strategist. Internal Affairs had already detained the compromised officer. Under questioning, he broke faster than Ruiz expected. There was no grand ideological motive. No loyalty oath. Just pressure, financial leverage, family vulnerabilities, quiet threats delivered by intermediaries who never revealed names. But the officer confirmed something critical. He had been instructed not to protect the cartel. He had been instructed to protect the transition. That word again. Transition. Project Azul wasn't about expansion alone. It was about restructuring the cartel into a decentralized network that could operate without a visible head. No king. No throne. No obvious target for governments to dismantle. The assassination had been the opening strike in a corporate-style rebrand of organized crime. Within days, intelligence agencies across Mexico, the United States, and parts of Europe began noticing coordinated financial shifts. Smaller, semi-autonomous cells were registering shell companies in different countries. Cryptocurrency movements were fragmented into microtransactions. Communication chains were shortened, compartmentalized. It was brilliant and terrifying. The inner circle? They were no longer competing. They were collaborating. The red circles on that warehouse corkboard weren't targets for elimination, they were designated overseers of independent divisions. Each lieutenant retained power, but none held absolute authority. A council model. Shared risk. Shared profit. And no single vulnerability. Ruiz presented the findings in a closed-door federal briefing. The room fell silent as he finished outlining the transformation. If this structure solidifies, one intelligence director said quietly, we won't be chasing a kingpin anymore. We'll be chasing shadows. That word lingered. Shadows. Outside government buildings, life went on as usual. News cycles shifted. Public attention drifted to other crises. The assassination faded from headlines. But under the surface, shipments increased. European ports reported subtle spikes in synthetic narcotics. U.S. border seizures reflected new chemical signatures, refined processes, higher potency. Profits climbed. Phase 2 was working. Then Ruiz received a final encrypted file from an international partner agency. Inside was a transcript of a private meeting intercepted weeks before the assassination. The voice speaking calmly in that recording was identified as El Arquitecto. He had never publicly claimed leadership. He had never stepped into the spotlight. Instead, he had proposed something radical. Remove the symbol. Remove the throne. Make the structure the power. Listening to the recording, Ruiz realized something chilling the fallen leader may have known. The tone suggested negotiation, not ambush. Debate, not hostility. Was the assassination forced? Or had it been accepted as the necessary sacrifice to evolve the organization? If that possibility unsettles you, it should. Because sometimes power doesn't collapse, it upgrades. By the time arrest warrants were prepared for key suspects tied to Project Azul, the structure had already decentralized beyond easy reach. Targets relocated. Identities shifted. Communications rerouted through layers of encryption. The compromised officer revealed one last detail before being transferred to federal custody. The man in the parking garage had said something during their brief meeting. Not a threat. Not a warning. A prediction. 3 months from now, they'll stop asking who killed him. They'll start realizing it doesn't matter. 3 months later, Ruiz stood inside another secure operations room. There had been no public explosion of violence. No chaotic civil war. Instead, the cartel's influence had expanded quietly into markets that had once been inaccessible. Without a throne, there was no singular enemy to rally against. Without a face, there was no headline to chase. And then came the twist no one expected. One of the inner circle, presumed loyal to the new decentralized model, was found dead in a remote compound. No public statement. No claim of responsibility. Just a message circulated internally. Adaptation requires discipline. It wasn't revenge. It was quality control. The council model had limits. Those who deviated were removed. Efficiently. Cleanly. The future of the powerful Jalisco Cartel wasn't unstable. It was optimized. Governments could no longer focus on dismantling one leader. Instead, they faced a distributed system, one that could regenerate leadership organically if any node was removed. Standing alone in his office late that night, Ruiz replayed the parking garage footage one last time. He froze the frame at the exact moment before the camera glitched. 7 seconds of darkness. 7 seconds that changed everything. He realized something else. The glitch wasn't a malfunction. It was pre-programmed. Someone inside federal infrastructure had enabled it. Which meant the corruption wasn't just tactical. It was embedded. The king was gone. The throne was gone. But the empire remained, quieter, more strategic, harder to see. And as Ruiz shut down his monitor, a new intelligence alert appeared on his screen. Encrypted chatter referencing Phase 3. No details. No explanation. Just confirmation that the evolution wasn't finished. If this story left you questioning how deep power really runs, comment below. Can decentralized crime ever truly be stopped? I want to see your thoughts. And if you felt the tension building from the beginning until this final revelation, hit like so this investigation reaches more people who think they've already seen it all. Because the truth is, this wasn't the end of a cartel. It was the beginning of something designed to survive without a king. If you think this case was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe now because the next story will uncover a criminal network even more unexpected, and you won't want to miss the first clue when it drops.